let's go ahead and see and add these two buttons, save and cancel. So this is the power of code reuse, as you will see. So at the bottom, after the third lambda there, I'm going to add buttons. So I'm going to put in a row and add a modifier. I'm going to padding top about 60p, and let's add a horizontal arrangement. I'm going to say space around. Now I'm going to add these two buttons. Remember, we are going to reuse some code that we've done before. We're going to call the rounded button. So if you come down here, say rounded button like so. Right. So if you say rounded button like such, you'll see that we can actually go there. This is in our components. We have this rounded button, which allows us to pass the label, radius, unpressed, and so forth. So there we go. Code reusability. That's real great. So put label. I'm going to say save. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the trailing lambda there. This is where we're going to pass the onClick event. So what is that we want to do? Well, here we want to save this book to the Firestore database. Well, first I'm going to say val, say db, and I'm going to instantiate it, Firebase Firestore, get instance as such. Okay. Now we're going to get back to that. Let me create another, add another button real quick so we have both of them. So row, we have that button. I'm going to add a spacer here to be about 25 dp to give that nice space. And put another rounded button. And this one for the label, I'm going to say cancel. So when we cancel, I'm just going to say nav controller, right? Pop back like this. So here I'm actually going to call a function which we haven't created yet. Save to Firebase. So all I will have to do here is pass a book. Okay, let's go ahead and create that. This book is going to be MBook. You may remember MBook for before, but we're going to get to that. All right, so if that's the case, let's just go ahead and cut this. Something like that. And here I'm going to say val book. It's going to be MBook like that. I'm going to say MBook, and we will instantiate the book. Now let's go to MBook and see what's the situation there. Well, we did this a while ago, and we added a few properties here in our constructor, but we need to change a few things actually. So we were able to save a full book into our Firebase database. Let's add other fields here. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video and add all the fields, and then we will continue. Okay, there we go. We have all the fields that we need. There's one thing that we need to talk about here, because the way things are structured in our backend, going back to our Cloud Firestore, we are obviously going to create yet another collection here called books, right? That's going to happen when we save our first book. And if you look at the structure of all of our properties that we're passing, you'll notice that we have a few things here. The user ID. Now, the reason why we're passing a user ID into our book is because we want to make sure that each book that is added is connected to a user ID. So if I'm Paulo, I'm adding a book, I want to save that book and add a user ID, my user ID. That way it's way easier for me to later filter through all the books that may be in our books database and just get my books. So that's why we're adding the user ID of the current user that is signed in. And you also notice that we have this Google Book ID here. So it's always nice to added that Google Book ID because we may need to look up that book. Those are two things that you were seeing there. But also we have this started reading timestamp. If you hover over, it's going to see this. This is actually a Google Firebase timestamp. Okay, it says here a timestamp represents a point in time independent of any time zone or calendar. This is good because we want to extrapolate the actual time of the day or time, in this case, that this person started reading it, independent of where they are reading it from or which computer, timestamp, and so forth. So this is a special timestamp we're going to be adding into our database as well. But then there's another problem here. If we were to use this MBook into our readers here, create, right, instantiate, create all the fields and add them and try to save to our database, right, we're going to have a problem. Reason being is, if you look at how the fields are structured in our in the backend here in our database Firestore, you'll see that for each field we have this avatar underscore URL. So this is the way you should always structure your fields, which means every time you have two words in a field, they should be separated by underscore. Okay, that's just best practices. If you look at MBook, you will see that these fields, these properties, well, they look different because we are using, this should be URL. There was a problem there. So because they're using a convention that we use in Kotlin, right? So camel case and so forth. But we don't want that. We want to make sure that, for instance, this published date, when it goes to be saved in our database, it should be something like this, published underscore date. So how do we force this MBook to actually, when it's ready to be saved, to, instead of having the field published date as such, we have something like this. In order to do that, we'll have to add getters and setters for our property name. Now, this is the solution that I found because it was very difficult to figure out how to get this to work. And this is what is working as of recording of this video. So what you need to do, for instance, first of all, I know that ID and title, all the properties that have just a single name, they don't need to have their property name changed, right? Because it's just one single name, so they're just going to show like this. Okay, quote, profession, and so forth. So let's start with our photo URL. So what you will have to do, you have to do the following. Say at get annotation as such, and then you're going to say property name. Notice now it's showing property name and it's a Google Firebase property there. Very important. And then here I'm going to pass the value that I want to be saved as. So in this case, it's going to be what? Well, I can even be more specific. I can say I want this to be something like book underscore photo URL as such. And then I'll have to do the same thing by saying set, again, property name. Do the same thing as you see here, book photo URL. So I have to pass the get and setter properties to change these names when we're saving this data onto Firebase database. Very good. So I'm going to do the same thing for all the others that need to. Categories doesn't need that actually, so I can just go like this. So I'm just copy that. And in this case, our published date, I'm just going to say published date as such. And I'll do for the others so you don't have to watch me do this. Okay, so they're all done. Okay, so make sure you have all that set up. All of the ones that have two words like user ID, see, this is how they want to be saved. All right, very good. Now, the other thing also we need to do, you notice that I said earlier, if you remember, it's been a while, whenever we save something or create a collection and we save something, each something, in this case it's going to be a document, each one has a given ID, which means when we're saving this MBook, we don't need to pass the ID name or ID of any kind because that is done already by Firebase. So how do we exclude
this ID to be read or to be set when we pass values, when we pass this object? Well, all you do is say at again, exclude, voila, there is that keyword again, exclude annotation, and it's from Google Firebase Firestore, which is very convenient and reassuring. And I can say exclude this var ID, say like that. So I can put that in one line so that it's more readable. Okay, so now this will be excluded because the ID will still be there, but we'll know that it's going to be this ID here. So we don't need to pass that ID when we are saving this MBook. Very good. So now we have a complete MBook, right? And I changed this to MBook because if you look back to our project, if you go to models, you will see that we have this, let's see, yeah, we do have this book class that we looked at earlier, right? So we actually don't quite use it, but we have that class, which in this case will have items, kind, total items, and so forth. So we're not going to even use that, but I didn't want to have a contrast in this with these two classes. So that's why I said MBook. Okay, very good. So now that we have MBook, going back to our book details screen, we're going to be able to construct that MBook by passing all of the fields, right? And then be able to pass to save to Firebase and save that information, which we're going to be doing in the next video.